Okay, let's get straight into this. All right. So, welcome to the Compassionate Cultures podcast. Today, I'm talking to schools. I'm talking to schools about what you can do, what hopefully you are doing to help racially marginalized children in the aftermath of the race riots, the far right riots. Okay. I'm doing this because I know there have been questions from parents. I'm parts of many networks, and there are questions from many parents. And I should establish, sorry, it's not just ethnic minority pupils, but also pupils who are from a Muslim, immigrants, or other religious background who was under attack during those riots. This applies to all those pupils, all right? Because all those pupils will, or many of them, will be experiencing some sort of trauma as a result of hearing about or even seeing evidence of the riots on TV. It was absolutely terrifying. And again, in the last episode, I talk about, how I felt about it as an adult. So I think it's really important that schools have mechanisms in place so that pupils are able to process what's happened, so that other pupils understand the severity of racial trauma and racism, and so that there are systems and structures put into place to support pupils. Obviously, we know there's a limit to what schools can do. And so really I'm speaking about what you can do from a school's perspective, okay? So I'm not expecting schools to be able to deal with what happens outside of school, but this is about, your responsibility is to ensure that all pupils are safe. And at the moment, racial trauma is rampant, and it's not, for a lot of places, it's not being dealt with. Okay, so there are some students that they're going to return to school, and they're going to be very aware of their religion, their identity, their racial background, their skin color, their culture, because of the riots. Okay, so for them, this, it's a very exposing time. Whereas often, young people like to blend in, they like to be like everybody else. What the riots have done essentially is pointed out, you're different, and not only are you different, but you're bad. You are bad because of your difference. Now, for a young person, that's a lot to take on board. And, this is unfortunately quite common for there to be social unrest, where there is social unrest, racism and xenophobia, they seem to be amplified during that time, all right? And schools should be aware of this so that you can preempt what comes, okay? So, we find this all the time. Again, after George Floyd, we had lots of schools getting in touch saying, can you come and do a workshop on anti-racism? And to be honest, we don't do them anymore. And I'll tell you the reason why is because unless the teachers are educated in anti-racism, there kind of is no points. The impact will not be long lasting. And even then, if teachers are educated, then they actually don't need us, because they should be able to do the work themselves. Okay? So, I'd start by saying that really. First and foremost, educate your staff on systemic racism. Not just racism, systemic and institutional racism, okay? Because when you have an understanding of how racism is woven into the fabric of society, then you begin to see that this thing is much bigger than we thought it was. It's much bigger than that child saying, oh, I've got permission to use the N-word. I've got the N-word card. It's much bigger than that, okay? And it's a lot more pervasive, and it's can be a lot more sneaky. So even when you think something might just be bullying, so often, or sometimes should I say, there can be a racial element, and this is systemic. It happens time and time again, okay? So I want to talk about policies and why certain policies such as anti-discrimination and anti-bullying policies are not enough. Now, they are important, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're not important. However, what they focus on, what an anti-discrimination policy focuses on, are preventing overt acts of discrimination, such as racism, able-bodyism, sexism, and all those sorts of things. So all the visual things and things you can see, you can hear regularly, quite openly, that's what an anti-discrimination policy aims to prevent. It's all about prevention. Sorry, it's not about prevention. Sorry, go backwards. It aims to deal with in the aftermath once it's happened. Also, anti-bullying policies target aggressive behaviour. Yet both of these policies, they're quite reactive. Again, as I say, they focus on what happens once you've done this thing. So you've done this, and this is what's going to happen. Where's the preventative stuff? Where's the policies that look at creating environments where this sort of thing just doesn't happen? Okay, where racially marginalised pupils can feel that true sense of belonging and safety. They're not going to feel like, oh, so-and-so teacher's picking on me. They always pick on me. Is it because I'm X? Now, it might not be because they're X, but because they're very aware of systemic racism, they're hypervigilant. And that, by the way, is a sign of trauma. Okay, so what schools need is a transformative approach that goes deeper than just the rules. Okay, they need to create compassionate cultures, trauma-informed cultures, which values the identities of students from different racial, religious, and cultural backgrounds. Okay, so let's start by looking at those policies. Okay, what can you, as a school, do to create policies that are more inclusive? Okay, well, firstly, let's talk about systemic reform. I've always got to talk about the system of racism. Again, as I said, start with the education piece. Educate. I think staff, in an ideal world, all school staff will be educated in anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, cultural humility, very important, just being open to critiquing your own views of others and your behavior and committing yourself to a lifelong journey. All the other forms of discrimination, okay, you'd have that. And I know it's not easy. I know there aren't resources. So today I'm talking about race. So I think all schools should most definitely have anti-racism training, the teachers and other staff, right? So there should be an audit of all policies, practices, and cultures to identify how institutional racism might be operating within the school.
Hey, I know you're enjoying the podcast episode, but I just want to quickly come in and say, look, if you're an organization that needs anti-racism training for your organization because your staff are lacking in a racial literacy, they don't have the words, they get stuck when talking about racism, they want to be able to deal with incidents, but they're not sure how to, then check out our Time to Talk About Race online CPD accredited course at strawberrywords.co.uk. Okay, we can train from 10 to 10,000, but get in touch today at admin@strawberrywords.co.uk. Now back to the episode.
Right, and so this audit should include looking at the diversity of the curriculum. So when we're looking at geography, history, and so on, are there different perspectives portrayed and studied? Still in this day and age, many curriculums are very Eurocentric. When we look, again, we use the terminology global majority. The majority of people on this planet are black and brown, yet still, when we learn history within some schools, I don't know all, I don't go to all, I don't know, but a lot of it is just based on white European history. So, it's looking at all that. Is it being fair? Is it giving a genuine representation of history? Who's telling the stories, okay? Then obviously it's looking at staff diversity. Do staff represent, and that's staff at all levels, because I'm pretty sure if you're going to have ethnic minority staff, they're going to be the catering staff, they're going to be the cleaners. But when you go up through the ranks, does it get whiter and whiter and whiter? Let's be honest about this, okay? And again, in terms of religion, is that also fairly represented? Okay, What else? Parental and community engagement. Okay, so schools need to work with parents and the community to ensure that the emotional needs of pupils are met, all right, both inside and outside the classroom. You know, you do that in other areas for pupils, so it certainly can be done for this. Okay, so it could mean offering workshops on how to support racially marginalized children through racial trauma. It could be about collaborating with other organizations, bringing them in to run workshops for everybody. Okay. I also want to mention, so that was looking at policies. Oh, also very important included in this is disciplinary actions. You know, unfortunately, we have what's known as the schools to prisons pipeline. I'm not going to say too much about that because that's not what this is about. And if you want me to do an episode on that, please say, and I will. But what, you know, often ethnic minority students are unfairly and harshly punished compared to their white counterparts. This, you know, this is not just hearsay. Google it. There's a lot of academic research done on this, and what that can lead to and does lead to for some pupils is entry into the criminal justice system, because, you know, people tend to live down to the expectations placed upon them, and so if they're constantly being told they're bad, they're rude, and so on, it can lead to them just taking on that identity. And often, you know, I remember going into schools, because we did a lot of work in the schools when we first started in the early, I think, when did we start? 2000s, right? And I'd often walk into a school, go, you know, on the way to the hall, and I'd see a Tyrone, you know, a black boy outside of a classroom. And I'd ask, what have you done? What have you done? Oh, miss, I was talking or whatever. But it kept happening. And I think what happens is, and I know what happens a lot of the time, is that peoples from, you know, very passionate cultures such as, you know, African, Caribbean, sometimes some Asian communities, their behavior gets mistaken for bad behavior. But we're quite passionate, very passionate, and so if we're excited, it can, you know, it's expressed in our voice, and we might get louder, we might use hand expressions and so on. But for others who are not used to that, it might feel quite threatening. And we know that has happened also for teachers, okay? So then that can lead to them being, you know, treated harshly or unfairly. Also, when we think about symptoms of trauma, sometimes a symptom of trauma is misbehaving. So it's not because necessarily this pupil is just bad, because no one's all bad, but maybe something's happened, maybe something's going on with them. Okay, so that actually leads me on nicely to the importance of emotional support. All right, so in addition to changing policies, schools must address the emotional and mental health needs of pupils. And I just, you know, when the riots first happened, I actually put out a post on social media saying, urging parents of ethnic minority, Muslim, immigrant backgrounds to talk to your children. Talk to them now before anybody else gets in their ears, and let them know what's happening, because they're going to hear about it anyway, right? And so it was better for them to hear it from their parents in a loving, child-friendly way than to hear it from somebody who's alarmist and, you know, doesn't really care about the emotional needs of the child, and really just super duper scares them. So this is the kind of approach that schools need to be taking towards having any conversation about race. But there also needs to be systems in place. So for instance, having access to culturally responsive counselling. So having counselling that understands, or counsellors that understand racial trauma, okay? So culturally diverse counsellors, having access to those people, because often sometimes what you're dealing with, as I said, is a symptom of trauma and not just being rude for the sake of being rude, okay? And if they're not from a culturally diverse background, then they should at least have cultural competence or cultural humility training and training in racial trauma, all right? Then safe spaces need to be created. Where are the safe spaces for pupils to have conversations about their identities and what happens to them and the feelings that come up? Okay, right, now these can be informal. They don't have to be, very formal spaces, or it could just be that there's a person, a teacher that they know they can go to if something comes up for them. Being able to voice this, the trauma or the problems they're facing can be very therapeutic and often can be very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated or convoluted, doesn't need to be, all right? And then there's trauma-informed teaching. So being able to recognize the signs of trauma in pupils, again, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds. It doesn't mean that you've got to be a mental health professional, okay? It just means that you understand that, okay, this is what racial trauma looks like, and this is what this particular child could be facing in my classroom. So maybe they're anxious, maybe they're disengaged, again, maybe they're misbehaving. Okay, so training teachers in having a trauma-informed approach can help them to respond with compassion as opposed to discipline, all right? So, that's it really. That's it. I could go on, but I'm going to stop there. Just to say, again, start with the education piece, ensure that you have an anti-racism policy that goes over and beyond what is over and beyond what is stated in the anti-discrimination and or equal opportunities and anti-bullying policies. Okay, make sure you audit those policies, diversify the curriculum, diversify staff where possible, and also suppliers. I forgot to mention that. Engage with parents and the community, and then also recognize the importance of emotional support. So supply that culturally responsive counselling, create safe spaces, and educate teachers in being trauma informed. All right. So as always, if there's anything we can help you with, get in touch. We do the education piece. I've got to say, we have our online CPD accredited courses in anti-racism. We are here to support you. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.